Caitlyn is chilling right now, bruh. She definitely is. She do not have a care in the world, bruh, about what is going on in the WNBA.
In the ruthless multi-billion-dollar arena of professional sports business, leverage is not always communicated through loud public confrontations or aggressive statements across negotiating tables. Sometimes, the most devastating form of leverage is absolute silence. When a superstar player possesses undeniable economic power, they do not need to threaten strikes or issue desperate public statements. They can simply operate outside the league's ecosystem and demonstrate that their financial existence does not depend on the league itself. This is the exact power dynamic currently unfolding around Caitlin Clark and the WNBA's ongoing labor standoff. While the league faces severe uncertainty, with the majority of its workforce technically unsigned and the upcoming season facing potential disruption, Clark is physically and economically removed from the chaos. Her presence at global luxury events like Prada Fashion Week in Milan is not just a fashion appearance, it is a visible demonstration of financial independence. The contrast between Clark's position and the rest of the players' union exposes a massive structural divide. Veteran players are deeply dependent on the league's infrastructure. Their salaries, health insurance, housing, and overall economic stability are tied directly to the existence of a functioning WNBA season. Their demands for increased revenue sharing and improved compensation reflect an existential dependence on the league's survival. Clark, however, operates under an entirely different economic model. She has built a commercial.
Malik, I guess you could call it a deadline of sorts. The players were told in that meeting yesterday that if a term sheet is not completed by March 10th, then the most likely outcome is that the season will be impacted.
Commercial empire anchored by endorsement partnerships with global corporations like Nike, Gatorade, and State Farm. These partnerships generate millions in revenue independent of her WNBA salary. Her financial stability does not rely on the league's base salary structure. Her brand exists as a standalone corporate entity. This economic independence fundamentally alters the leverage equation. If the WNBA season were disrupted or delayed, the majority of players would face immediate financial consequences. Clark would not. Her income streams would continue uninterrupted through endorsements, media appearances, and global brand partnerships. Her market value is not confined to basketball games. It exists within the broader global entertainment and commercial ecosystem. At the same time, the WNBA ownership groups are engaged in a high-stakes negotiation strategy with the players' union. By establishing firm negotiation deadlines and delaying responses to union proposals, the owners have compressed the timeline. This forces the union to confront operational realities. League logistics, including expansion drafts, free agency, roster construction, and season scheduling, require a finalized collective bargaining agreement within a fixed time frame. This timeline compression creates pressure on the players' union.
Told me today that this was not taken well by the players when they heard this, that especially after the league took 6 weeks to respond to a union proposal at the beginning of the year, it just did not go over well, and that the players see this as an attempt for the league to pressure them into taking a deal they are not comfortable with. Now, the league, on the other hand,
the league cannot function administratively without contractual clarity. Expansion franchises in Toronto and Portland require roster construction. Free agency cannot proceed without salary cap rules. Training camps cannot open without signed agreements. These operational constraints give ownership a structural advantage. The players' union believed their leverage was rooted in player participation, but ownership understands that the timeline itself can be used as leverage. By controlling when negotiations progress, ownership influences the pressure environment surrounding the union. Clark's position exists outside of this pressure environment. Her economic stability does not rely on immediate league resolution. Her brand continues to grow regardless of league negotiations. Her visibility at global events reinforces the reality that her influence extends far beyond the boundaries of the WNBA. This creates a unique and unprecedented situation. The league benefits enormously from her presence, viewership impact, and commercial draw. Television ratings, sponsorship growth, and public attention have all increased significantly alongside her emergence. Her individual market value enhances the overall valuation of the league itself. At the same time, her independence highlights the economic vulnerability of the broader player base. Most players rely on league salaries as their primary income source. Their leverage is collective. Clark's leverage is individual. Ownership understands that the league's commercial growth is strongly connected to Clark's presence. The union understands it as well. But Clark herself is not structurally dependent on the outcome in the same way. This asymmetry defines the current power dynamic. The situation ultimately reflects a larger structural truth about modern professional sports. Individual superstar athletes can evolve into independent global brands whose economic influence extends beyond the leagues they play in. When that transformation occurs, the traditional balance of power between league, union, and player begins to shift. Clark represents one of the clearest examples of this shift. Her financial independence, global brand presence, and commercial influence position her differently from the rest of the league. Her leverage does not come from confrontation, it comes from detachment.
This detachment is what makes the situation so psychologically destabilizing for both sides of the labor conflict. Because traditionally, in professional sports labor disputes, both ownership and players exist in a mutually assured economic dependency. Owners require players to generate revenue. Players require owners to provide infrastructure, salaries, and legitimacy. The system is designed to lock both sides into a shared economic ecosystem where neither can survive independently for long. But Caitlin Clark has quietly broken that equilibrium. She is no longer operating exclusively as an employee of a sports league. She is functioning as a global commercial property. Her value is not confined to points scored, assists recorded, or games played. Her value exists in brand associations, audience attention, cultural influence, and global marketability. She is not simply participating in the WNBA economy, she is influencing it from outside its traditional structural boundaries. This creates a deeply uncomfortable reality for the ownership groups, because while ownership technically controls the physical infrastructure of the league, arenas, media rights agreements, franchise operations, they do not fully control the most important economic driver within that system. They do not control Clark's independent commercial existence. Ownership can cancel games. Ownership can lock facilities. Ownership can delay contracts, but ownership cannot stop Nike from paying Clark millions. Ownership cannot stop global brands from associating with her. Ownership cannot prevent her from maintaining cultural relevance outside of league competition. This limits the effectiveness of traditional ownership pressure tactics. Historically, when leagues applied pressure through lockouts or delays, players would eventually concede because their income streams would collapse. Their economic survival depended on returning to league play. But Clark's economic survival does not depend on immediate league participation. Her financial engine continues to operate regardless of whether a WNBA game is played tomorrow or 6 months from now. This reality weakens ownership's most powerful traditional weapon, time. Time is normally ownership's greatest advantage. Billionaire ownership groups can afford prolonged revenue interruptions. They possess diversified wealth portfolios, external business interests, and massive liquidity reserves. Players, by contrast, typically rely on active salaries. Delays hurt players faster than owners. But Clark's presence complicates this dynamic, because Clark's individual brand continues generating value even during inactivity. She does not experience the same economic decay that affects other players during labor disruptions. At the same time, the players' union faces its own internal structural tension, because while Clark's existence strengthens the league's overall bargaining position externally, it weakens the union's bargaining unity internally. The union operates on collective leverage. Its strength comes from the unified participation of all players. But when one player operates under fundamentally different economic conditions, the internal cohesion of that collective becomes fragile. Veteran players are negotiating for survival. Clark is negotiating from independence. This difference in economic urgency creates a psychological imbalance within the union itself. Because while union leadership must consider long-term structural gains, individual players must consider short-term financial survival. Housing stipends, salary floors, and healthcare guarantees are not abstract negotiating points. They are immediate economic necessities for the majority of players. Clark does not face those same pressures. This does not mean she is opposed to union goals, but it means her personal timeline is not dictated by desperation, and desperation is often the most powerful driver of concessions in labor negotiations. Ownership understands this distinction clearly.
Ownership must balance two competing objectives. First, ownership must maintain financial discipline and protect long-term league sustainability. Excessive concessions to union demands could destabilize franchise economics. Second, ownership must preserve the league's growth trajectory, which is heavily influenced by Clark's presence. These objectives do not always align perfectly. Excessive rigidity risks damaging the league's growth momentum. Excessive concession risks undermining ownership control. This creates a delicate strategic balancing act. Ownership cannot appear weak, but ownership also cannot afford structural collapse. At the same time, broadcast partners, sponsors, and expansion investors are closely monitoring the situation. Media rights agreements depend on reliable content delivery. Sponsors depend on audience engagement. Expansion franchises depend on operational certainty. Clark's presence dramatically enhances all three. Her games generate higher viewership. Her participation increases sponsor value. Her existence strengthens expansion franchise viability. This makes her not just a player, but an economic multiplier. Her participation amplifies the value of every component of the league ecosystem. Ownership understands this multiplier effect, but ownership also understands that conceding excessive structural control to player demands could create long-term instability. This is why negotiation outcomes are rarely determined solely by short-term economic pressure. They are shaped by long-term structural considerations. Ownership must consider franchise valuations, investor confidence, and league sustainability. The union must consider player welfare, compensation fairness, and career stability. Clark exists at the intersection of these competing priorities. Her independence gives her unique flexibility, but her participation still enhances the league's structural strength. This creates a situation where all parties benefit from eventual resolution. Ownership benefits from her participation. The union benefits from her influence. She benefits from continued competitive relevance. But until resolution occurs, the leverage landscape remains fluid. Ownership controls infrastructure. The union controls labor participation. Clark controls cultural attention. And cultural attention is the foundation upon which modern sports economics is built. Because without audience attention, media rights lose value. Without media rights, sponsorships lose value. Without sponsorships, franchise valuations stagnate. Clark generates attention at a scale previously unseen in the WNBA. Her attention generation capacity strengthens the entire economic ecosystem. This is why her independence carries such strategic significance. It demonstrates that individual athletes can transcend traditional structural limitations. It demonstrates that modern sports economics are increasingly driven by individual brand power. And it demonstrates that leverage in professional sports is no longer determined solely by contracts, but by influence, visibility, and marketability. Clark represents the evolution of athlete leverage in the modern era.
not through confrontation, not through public threats, but through economic independence and cultural dominance. Her presence in Milan is not merely symbolic, it is structural. It signals that her relevance exists beyond league boundaries. It signals that her leverage operates on a global scale. And it signals that the traditional balance of power between league, union, and individual athlete is undergoing fundamental transformation. This transformation will influence not only the outcome of the current labor dispute, but the future structure of professional women's basketball itself. Because once an athlete demonstrates true independence, the entire economic model must adapt to accommodate that reality. The WNBA is no longer negotiating solely with a collective workforce. It is operating within an ecosystem shaped by global individual brand power, and that changes everything.